and Jadip, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Naduni, and welcome to all participants here. My name is Jaideep Singh, and I'm the youth representative to the Board of Directors of MUN Impact. I'm currently also the program head for MUN at Home and Omen, the two flagship programs of MUN Impact. And today I have the privilege and opportunity to moderate this forum on an issue which I personally work on in the capacity of a researcher, and also with some very distinguished leaders in our MUN Impact student community. We are talking about the fact that we do not have a planet B, and we want to talk about the link between technology and the environment. Without further ado, let me jump on to welcome our panelists for this open forum. We are joined by three wonderful student leaders from different parts of the world, and we are looking forward to having a great discussion. The format I'm going to follow for this moderation is as follows. I'll first call upon each speaker. I will introduce each speaker, and then they may give their initial thoughts on the issue at hand. And with that, I'd like to first welcome our first speaker, Matthew O, who's our co-global Secretary General at MUN Impact. He conducts outreach to schools, conferences, and organizations to promote Model UN and the Sustainable Development Goals. He also overhauls information sharing systems for partnerships between MUN Impact Global, MUN Impact Global at the university level, and the 100K Deeds program. He has reached 150 plus student leaders till date, servicing 100 plus partners at MUN Impact, and has personally led outreach efforts to Youthtopia, International School of Kigali, and Education for All Global Foundation, ranging from countries such as Indonesia, Rwanda, China, and even the United States, where he currently lives. He also manages a team of 60 plus translators who are currently working under the 100K and MUN Impact non-English initiatives to translate different important documents and toolkits into 22 plus languages. He has also worked with high-profile stakeholders such as the UNICEF in Egypt and the Subramaniam Academy of Performing Arts, which was the brainchild of the 100K Deeds. Apart from MUN Impact, he also volunteers in the Vruksh ecosystem, which is an MUN Impact partner, and is also appointed by the Education for All global organization as their microfinance team member. And without further ado, I'd like to call upon Matthew to share his thoughts on the link between technology and SDG 15. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Hey everyone, can you all hear me? Okay, I'd like to apologize that I don't have my camera on. It's a little bit of an uncomfortable spot at the moment, but I will be fixing it very shortly, and hopefully I can turn it on for some of the next questions. So obviously, the topic that we're here to discuss is a very important one. MUN's GWA Global Weeks of Action sessions got its starts with SDG 16, which is climate action. And we're so glad to know that, our second iteration is going to continue that tradition and focus on SDG 15, life on land. The past few decades for us as, I guess, in a way, a species, has seen tremendous, literally exponential technological growth, and for majority, this technological growth has been a force for good. Because of it, we're more connected than ever. We have much more conveniences at our fingertips, and mortality rates are steadily decreasing, and lifespans are lengthening. But of course, we all know it's undeniable that there's been a myriad of issues that that new technologies have created for us, one of which most glaringly is fossil fuels. And we can very clearly see the effects in our atmosphere. There's no debate about this. It should be very evident by now. And the biggest issue we have in tackling this problem isn't that there aren't enough interested students who are willing to comment on the problem, or that there aren't enough, because students have a louder voice than ever to act and make their voice heard. We see Greta Thunberg, we see all of our community and grassroots organizing. There's no question that students are more than capable of stepping up to the plate and shouting at the as loud as they can and making sure people can hear. That's no longer the issue. The issue is that we have a highly institutionalized, highly established corporate lobby. And it's not just United States, it's in every country, especially in countries that, maybe practice a certain strain of, dare I say, neocolonialism that allow these corporate interests to dig deep and have their stranglehold on lesser developed nations. And through that, exploit its people, exploit its natural resources, and actively contribute to the problems that we see today. Now, all of this being said, it's clear that we know, who our quote unquote enemy is, that there's no question that we know where to focus our ire on. And with that being said, how do we use technology as a force for social change to get rid of such institutionalized greed? In my view, the power of technology is its ability to connect people together. We're from every continent, every country, but yet we're all here sitting today in the Zoom room and being able to share in this forum of ideas. And so what's really important moving forward is that we not just educate ourselves, but we make our voices known, and we leverage the fact that this internet is the technology that we have, the virtual spaces that we have, cannot be controlled that easily by people who are trying to stifle conversations about climate change, and leverage our advantages to be able to community organize on a level that we've never seen before, to be able to share information, and follow the money and target some of these big institutional interests that are really contributing and standing in the way of us being able to reach SDG 15. So I'm no expert on climate change. I don't claim to be. I'm just a high school student, but I know who my so-called enemy is. And I hope that, as we continue to have our discussions today, we're able to have this exchange of ideas, and our mission becomes clearer as we emerge from today's session. We know where to focus our ire, and we know that one of the most powerful weapons we have in this fight is technology and the ability to community organize. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. That's some great insight there, particularly linking the element of advocacy as the youth together with the technological aspect, how we as tech-savvy individuals of this generation can actually leverage that and use that to our advantage to advocate for better environmental policy. And I think that's going to be an interesting topic to talk about as we go along the forum. So thank you, Matthew. And it's okay, we'd love to see you, but it's okay if the camera isn't fixed. With that said, let's move on to our next panelist. As I mentioned already in the chat, we'll go over all the panelists first, and then we'll start with the questions on this panel. And I'd love to take questions from the audience. I have guiding questions, but they come secondary. It's you we want to hear first. So feel free to put in questions in the chat, and we'll compile them and go over them once we're done with the panelists one by one. So let's move on to our second panelist for today's session. And we are joined by Javier. Javier Rincon is a freshman in the Universidad Iberoamericana, studying chemical engineering. Oh, you're studying chemical engineering. I'm studying chemical engineering as well. He was the SG for MUN Impact Latam in the period of 2019-20. In 2020, he got the chance to be one of the youth speakers in the UN International Day of Peace observance, where I was also a moderator, as one of the selected youth speakers. His goal is to help pave the road for this and future generations to create a world that is aware of their surroundings and how to create adequate impact with tools we currently have as the youth. So with that short introduction, I'd like to welcome Javier to the floor. Javier, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you for this invitation. I think that regarding technology and the environment, those are two really important topics that we can all relate, because everyone sees impact in their own communities in different ways. Some countries see it as there's more pollution by contaminants that are in the water, and others by seeing them in the air. Something that regards, and it's really important to talk when we're seeing this topic, is what is technology? Because all of these technological advancements are really different. They have different impacts and help us to solve new problems, but at the same time, create new problems. This is something that is unavoidable, as technology and everything has certain impacts. There's problems and there's solutions. With technology, the benefits that we have is that we have better outreach. We can know better our surroundings and help ourselves to understand it better. What do I mean by this? Sometimes we can see how certain pollution, certain production of manufacturing can create certain byproducts, can be leading causes to diseases, can be leading causes of death of certain animals, of certain species, of certain terrains. These problems are faced because of the large development in industrial facilities, because byproduct is something that happens constantly. As a youth, our task is not really to be focusing on bigger industries, because that's a topic that we cannot handle ourselves. These larger corporations are the ones that are ruling the world. These corporations are the ones that have face value and understand what are their surroundings and exploit them in an economical, in a political, in a social level. As the youth, we need to try and find these ways to actually make the better of what we have. Instead of focusing on making better technologies, understanding the ones that we have currently, because they have certain impacts and certain positions that we don't understand fully. A big example of this is using technologies to actually create solutions in a community level. By understanding the professions of the members of our community, how can we help and what are our strengths? Through this we can actually make more impact than we can ever imagine. And this is why it's really important to understand better technology, because it's not a thing of saying it's good or it's bad, or it's making harm or it's going good for the environment. It's knowing our position on this and trying to make the best things out of it. Because an understanding is that it's impossible to make the perfect technologies, to make the perfect of everything. We just need to optimize the resources that we have to try and make a better understanding. So with this, I'm looking forward to be working with certain questions so we can have all a better understanding and asking ourselves some questions, because with this we may find solutions that we can actually apply to our communities, to our society, to our countries, to help better and to furthermore the development and of securing land or life in land. So with this, thank you for this presentation, and I look forward to be talking about the questions.
Thank you, Javier. That was a very insightful introduction. Some important points made there. First, I think one very important point which was brought up was that technology has both good and bad, and then that we need to optimize the effects of this technology to leverage them to protect life on land. So that element there is crucial. It's important to understand that technology has good and bad. It's not all bad. Some people make it all bad. Some people make it all good. But there is an optimum point to be reached. And that's where the information, the awareness, the advocacy, the ability to read and explore, that's where it comes into picture. And I think that's going to be a very good talking point to talk about. So thank you, Javier, for those points. Now we go on to introduce our final panelists for this forum. And I'd like to welcome Piper Yu. She works as the Deputy Secretary General for Southeast and East Asian region at MUN Impact Global. She's also involved in our MUN at Home initiative as a mentor. Apart from this program, she's also the founder of and the CEO of Zarabica, which is a company in Manila in the Philippines, which she founded with several enthusiastic philanthropic people in order to sell cold brew as a means to combine coffee with creativity to empower the youth of the Philippines. She also has worked as an acquisition consultant for the Lishendle Enterprises in the Indiana state. And with that introduction, I'd like to welcome Piper to share her thoughts on the use of technology as someone who works in innovation and entrepreneurship. Piper, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. And I think I'd like to start off by agreeing with the panelists who've actually spoken before me that there's no like one-sided argument. And you definitely can't look at technology and have like an easy yes or no answer. But something I also wanted to highlight is that technology is nothing but a tool. You know, we create technology to solve a problem that we face. So it's not the tool's fault that, you know, this environment and all these effects are happening, because at the end of the day, it comes at the cost. You know, we can't solve a problem and expect every single thing to be perfect. You know, there are downsides to decisions. And, you know, I think I want to bring up the question of, are these downsides worth it? Is it worth it to sacrifice, you know, our environment, everything, our convenience for technology and making our lives easier? So it's technically, it also brings into question whether or not we should be changing our habits. Because at the end of the day, we are the reason why technology is being created and why the environment is being destroyed. So we, instead of trying to change technology, maybe we should think about how we are using it and use it for the better, because we see many examples of how technology can actually help us. You know, many people blame the Industrial Revolution, but at the end of the day, science does help humanity. It's how we live, it's how we function, it's how we innovate. And I think that we should start making better decisions in how we use it, because there are wonderful ways to use it to impact the environment in a really great way. Yeah, and I look forward to discussing this with the other panelists today. Thank you.
Thanks, Piper, and some important points made by our third panelist as well. Not only is the good and bad something to be examined, but you also need to look at the fact that technology is a tool. And like Piper rightly mentioned, the Industrial Revolution is often villainized to be the cause of all problems we have in the environment today. But I think a lot of the things we're able to do today, even to advocate, wouldn't be possible if the Industrial Revolution wouldn't happen. If we didn't have the Industrial Revolution, we wouldn't be sitting on a Zoom call talking about SDG 15 at all. Or so. It's a boon in a way, it's a bane in another, and there is a two-sided coin at play here. So that's something to consider in our discussion further. So thank you to all three panelists for your introductory comments and opinions, and we will now be going ahead with the Q&A segment. So like I mentioned, I do have guiding questions, but they don't come first. The audience comes first. So we're going to go and look at the chat and see if we can find some questions from our audiences. How I like to do this is I like to call upon the participant who's asked the question, and they can ask the question themselves. That way there's some engagement with the panelists as well. So let's start off with our first question, which comes in from Rita. Rita, who joins us from Portugal. Rita, do you want to go ahead and ask your question to our panelists?
Yeah, sure. So my question is, how can you be interested in starting to create impact for SDG 15 in their community and perhaps globally, do so by leveraging the power of technology? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for the question, Rita. Let's start off from Matthew. Matthew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the question. Okay, so during last year, the world saw a monumentous kind of era of change. Obviously, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, but more, I guess, in a way, heartbreaking and hitting closer to home for Americans. We had the George Floyd protests that happened during around mid-2020 to late 2020. And, you know, it's not so much the issue that's important, because obviously that has something to do with SDG 16, not necessarily with 15, not unless you're looking at it intersectionally. But my main point is, you know, during this period of time, social media was a remarkable force, was a vicious and ferocious force in terms of being able to coordinate local action among activist groups, as well as share information. In fact, it's not proud of me to say, but a lot of the way I learned about some of these cases was by seeing what was coming through on Instagram, especially some of the cases that may have been underreported in regular news outlets. So in that sense, social media is really like one of the most powerful things when it comes to how are we going to be able to break down institutions by community organizing. And it's as simple as, you know, being committed, perhaps having a team, people who are talented at infographics, who have like a strong sense of reporting what is true and reporting what maybe no one else wants to hear. And having a team like that, a crack team like that, to be able to go at it and put out all sorts of information that, you know, can reach millions of people, truly a global audience. You know, like we can see infographics can go viral just like that. And it's so important that people keep up that that rapid press of all of these new information, and as long as it's being kept factual, of course. And through that, it's able to keep so many people up to date and inspire so many people to perform their own action in their own community. So this is one way. The second way is there are things, I've never participated in one, but from what I understand, there are such things as virtual marches, and basically virtual, in general, what I mean, virtual spaces where activists for different SDGs, different communities can come together and they can share information, they can organize, they can especially get their voices heard if they are experiencing some sort of intimidation, harassment, legal challenges in their work. And so, you know, it's really down to simple ground roots of just creating and disseminating verifiable and truthful information, for one. And secondly is being able to organize into virtual spaces where people can share best practices, where people can organize larger events, where people can feel like they have a sense of community and some sense of camaraderie in whatever type of problem they're trying to tackle, which in this case would be SDG 15.
Thanks, Matthew. Some important points made there. Advocacy is one thing you can do with technology very strongly. And I think Matthew very well nailed that into the coffin. And he mentioned virtual marches. He mentioned the fact that today we don't have reliable sources of information. A lot of them are not. And even if you contribute in trying to make people aware about the right things, about the right information, about environmental depreciations, the right numbers, they go a long way in actually sparking that action. And that's important. That's a really important point right there. So thank you, Matthew, for those thoughts. Let's now maybe move on to Javier to see what he has to say on this.
First of all, Rita, that's a really interesting question, because everyone as a person always gets this question of what can I do with the things that I have? Right now that I don't have a degree, right now that I don't have experience, what can I do to actually help? That's something that haunts us everyone at every moment. And I would say that the first step to actually making certain impact is to be informed yourself. How many of you have done a work for school and just Googled something and just from the 20 million results that happen, just choose the first site that appears? At least I can say that I've done it sometimes. And that can be a bad thing, because we don't get the information, we don't try to verify our facts. We don't try and check if there are other solutions or other answers to the things that we're asking ourselves. So it's really important for us to stay informed, to research as much as we can on certain topics, and to try and see what else can be done to actually get a solution. With that information, there's many ways that people can actually be helping. You can implement certain programs. You can try and find ways to impact your community in certain ways that is helpful to yourself. Because what is being done on China may not work here in Mexico. And in the same for the United States or many other countries. So in that sense, it's really good also to try and talk to people. Try and find your professionals. Try and find your friends. Try and find members of your community and talk these things over, so you can get their own perspectives on what can be done and try and get them on board. Because this way, you can make community programs, you can make certain impacts, and you can be moving the gears of this action by yourself. Because at this given time, yes, technology is here, but it's not the only way that we can communicate. It's not the only means to get actually things done. We can do them by ourselves, by getting our hands dirty, by going out to the streets and actually getting people their help instead of just relying on technology. In this means, we can also try and see technology in a way that we can actually implement it ourselves by, like Matthew said, just creating programs online, by getting other members from other places, getting these things we can actually make these networks to help each other, to try and get outreach, to try and make programs and have a bigger impact. Because yes, social media has the potential to be the biggest outreach in the world, to communicate with millions in seconds. But it's also dangerous because you're exposing yourself to more misinformation, you're exposing yourself to certain criticism from other members of the community and to plagiarism. Because right now there's no medium to control social media. With this type of information, just try and mix everything together. Use social media to try and boost the things that you're doing, but also try and find help and resources from other places. Try and see other alternatives that you may at first hand thought they were not possible or that they were not helpful. Because in those places you may find answers that be surprising to actually solving crisis.
Great, thank you, Javier. Some important points made there. Of course, the same sentiment echoed by what Matthew said. But then again, an important point made there was let's start local. Let's start within our communities. And that's where you start, where you make the most impact. Simply because if you take inspiration, like Javier mentioned, from China and you're living in Mexico, the same thing may not work for you. And that's an important point, very important point made there. Start local. So with that said, let's go to Piper, who is our final panelist on this issue. Piper, what do you have to say?
I think that the natural direction that everyone starts off with when trying to use tech to achieve any sort of, cause is actually to, resort to social media. And I'm not going to fight that because that is absolutely true. There was nothing wrong with what was said. But, social media is all about gaining information, but that's where most people stop, in my opinion. They gain the information and then they stop looking, they sit down. It's the end of the day. And I think that we should go further. We should do actions. We should do something to actually use technology to combat the problem. And, I'm a high school student as well. I know we're not rich. We can't sponsor like these massive environmental programs, or we're not like influential people that can invite like the whole world. We're ordinary people, but we can stop climate change in our own like simple yet purposeful ways. And I think one great example of that is through the tech and AI. AI has been rising. You can code things, you can design these little robots, and you don't have to be like extremely intellectual. Like I'm not the best coder in the world, and I know like very basic Python, but it can still help in a way. And I spoke earlier about leveraging technology and changing our outlook on it to actually achieve something positive. And I think this is a great way to do it. Even if it's just trying, even if you don't succeed, the actual act of making an effort to contribute positively to the SDG 15 is really what's important. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Piper. So again, some important points made there. Tech and AI, I love that because I work in tech and AI. And it's absolutely crucial that people understand that while advocacy is important, while awareness is important, you need to look for avenues and opportunities to leverage action. And one way of doing that is if you are involved in technology, if you are involved in the grassroots of technology, and I think that's a very good link right there on finally touching on the technology aspect. Let's try to talk about AI, robots. To put it very simply, I know a lot of our students here are maybe middle schoolers. So if you think AI is like something weird, if you watched Avengers, you know that you have these robots, or any kind of sci-fi movie for that matter. These robots which you see in movies are now a reality. They may not be as sophisticated as you see in a Stanley cartoon, but they'll definitely be very, very interesting to work with, especially in performing some of these tasks which humans do today. And that includes a lot of our technological aspect. So I will give you an example if we do come to that a little later on, but very good points made by all panelists. Thank you very much. Let's start off with another question. So we have a couple of questions, and I'm glad that our participants are involved. So let's take the next question, maybe from, if I'm not wrong, Farneet. Farneet, do you have a question? Do you want to maybe ask the question to the panelists directly?
Yes, sir, sure. Thank you so much for letting me speak. And my question, I also put that in the chat, that what challenges do we really face when we aware people about these topics? Because they often neglect and ignore these things because it does not affect them directly, their lives. They don't see the impact of technology on their lives directly, so they think it's not true, or often they ignore it. So how we can aware them in a more efficient way than we do?
Thank you, Farneet. And Medha's question. Medha, if you're still in the call, I think Medha had a very similar question. So Medha's question was how to overcome challenges faced while trying to create an impact on creating awareness and working at the community level. So since both of these questions were pretty similar, I kind of clubbed them together. So thank you, Medha, and Farneet for the question. Maybe let's start off with Javier this time. Javier.
Okay, this is a question that I've been seeing a lot recently, like in my personal life, because right now in university we're beginning to develop some certain projects with our faculties, and we're seeing these things like from first hand, where we try to find problems, and we get the normal question of the professor saying, "This is not possible. You cannot do this. This is too big for you to be doing." And again, these sort of things are valid. These are things that we're going to be facing all of the time. But hearing these is not a bad thing. Sometimes hearing this criticism can be positive because we challenge ourselves to look in other ways, try to find other solutions, and try to find more realistic things. Because again, we're not perfect. We're not all complete powerful. We need to be acting on the small things because sometimes those can have the biggest impact. Just making a recollection of trash in your own community can have a big impact in your communal level, and that impact can become something bigger. Your government can begin acting on this. Your nearby communities can also be acting on this. So these sort of things can lead to even better results sometimes. And yes, it's hard to hear that there's people that are against your idea or that they think that it's stupid. But instead of just taking it as a whole and thinking that's not good, take the good things out of it. Make it better. Try to create other alternatives that can actually get people on board. Because those haters, those people that are against you, may not be just because of disliking. Maybe they have certain criticisms that is valid and they want to be with you, but they see these problems and say, if you don't fix it, I cannot be on board with your idea. So that's something really important to be taking into consideration when you're talking more specifically in a community level, because every opinion matters. Every member has their own ideas and they all never think the same way, and this is happening. This is why we're having this panel of discussion, because there's people that have different ideas but wanted to get to the same solution. So it's important to hear these things. And also, like, just like a final remark for this question, also think on yourself. Try to first find the problems that you want to solve first, and then think of how you can get everyone else involved, because your ideas are also valid. And if you want to start a project, it's better to make it passionately. Make something that interests you and then find a way to get everyone else on board. So that way, you're never going to be like lacking on anything. You're going to be always motivated, or you're going to always find a solution because you're the one that is motivating everyone else to do action.
Thanks, Javier, for some important points. Link with the community, like we mentioned earlier, and at the same time, make sure that you do not get demotivated because of a few people who aren't understanding your ideas. It's important to be open. It's important to be taking risks. And that's not just in this aspect. I think this applies anywhere. Wherever you want to start something new, don't be afraid of taking risks, no matter where you are. And that risks which work, they really go a long way. So yeah, don't be afraid of taking risks. A good point made there. Piper Memi, let's start with you now.
Absolutely. I think that the difficulty in using technology to solve, SDG 15 is because modern living is part of the problem. The way we like the way we live, people are so set in their ways that just the thought of changing it is so difficult that we can't like fathom anything. We can't fathom anything different. And that's why it's so hard to convince others, because we have to ask them to give up their greatest convenience. And everybody knows that it will benefit, but climate change is just so easy to ignore. And that's the reason why it's gotten so badly. Like in my country, the Philippines, pollution is practically second nature, and nobody tries to put any effort into stopping it. But we all know that the best projects are always the most opposed because they're the most ambitious. So don't let somebody telling you no stop you from doing it, because your idea, it may sound small, but everything starts small, doesn't it? Like every big company you've ever heard of started from a small idea that everybody opposed, and now they're massive. So that could be you in a few years, and it doesn't sound realistic, but it could be. So that's what I would say if you were facing, this kind of situation where somebody's discouraging you. But in terms of convincing somebody, there's no way to just directly force them to give up their lifestyle. I think you have to kind of edge them, and you have to convince them what you're doing it for. Because of the pandemic, like a lot of the pollution cleared up when everybody was forced to shut down. And so everybody kind of saw how it felt like, I guess, 20 years ago when there wasn't that much pollution. And we slowly started to realize, what had happened, what we had done. And because of that, we slowly started making changes. And I think that's how you approach it. You can't just tell someone, stop using technology, it's bad for you. You have to show them how it will help. And that's my main point for this question.
Convince people, persuade people, don't force people. You're not a dictatorship. I think that's a very good point made. And it's with open arms when people start accepting ideas. That's when they actually become groundbreaking and actually make real change. That holds for anything at all. And some groundbreaking innovation is always disruptive, by the way. Even science tells you that anything which has to change has to be a disruptive thing. Evolution was a disruptive phenomenon. The starting of telephones as a common usage was a disruptive phenomenon. Anything is a disruptive phenomenon. It takes time to get used to, but it definitely makes groundbreaking changes there. So some good points made there. Thank you, Piper. Matthew, do you want to add on anything before we move on?
For sure. I love what's been said so far, and I completely agree in the sense that, we should really only be advancing projects that we're able to pour our heart into and really believe in. Then, of course, comes the issue of being able to convince others that our cause is just or even sane. And I think in doing so, we have to discuss a bit of the methodology on how to be able to reach people and be able to convince them that, this social change is needed and in their best interest. And to do so, this really, in my view, is somewhat of a publicizing kind of issue and some of those strategies will need to be employed. I'm a huge believer in decentralized leadership. The idea that a central organization is able to give each of its branches, its cells, a certain degree of independence to be able to find out their own best practices and work in such a way that they're able to really run with their creativity and vision for their own team or whatever is within their purview. And that being said, so when we look at large NGOs, like say Greenpeace, for example, which has branches all over the globe, what's really important, how they're able to be successful, or at least, relatively successful, given how much the interest in climate change and climate issues has grown over the past 2 decades. The reason they've been able to achieve that success with all of their regional and country level branches is because of their individualized approach towards touching communities. And so putting that into English, into plain English, what does that look like? What are some of the individual things that are being done? Let's say here in Texas, where I'm situated, the weather here has been getting increasingly odd over the past few years. We had a tremendous amount of snow earlier this year, and the climate as a whole has been, you'd have one day of just intense sunlight, and then the next day it'd be raining. Last night there was a crazy thunderstorm, but today it seems perfectly sunny. And so whatever NGO, whatever student advocacy organization you're involved in, should start by approaching these local communities and pointing out these things that they can literally look out of their window and see. Don't you realize, since when has it been this cold in January? And you can just talk to these people and say, hey, there's something really wrong here, you know, and you can see it across the country. Look in your paper. Oh, California wildfires. Oh, Australia wildfires, a volcano here, an earthquake there. None of this is right. The weather patterns are all off. And somebody needs to be able to communicate that and say, you know, this thing, whatever we're dealing with, it has the power to change and upend your life in just like a split second, because these are natural disasters. There's no controlling it or saying it when and where they're going to strike. And in a way, that fear is probably one of the best motivating factors to get someone on board with the idea of climate change, acting for climate change and participating in climate advocacy, because you can see the effects of it just so clearly, just looking outside, looking out your window. And so the main takeaway is whatever initiative you're involved in, whatever grassroots initiative you're involved in, make sure that you're able to touch people through this very personalized, very relevant sphere. You're able to communicate to them the troubles that they're seeing in their daily lives and relating those troubles to climate change. And then they feel invested. Now they feel like they have an actual stake in helping to make the world a better place.
Yep, some important points. Thank you, Matthew. And I think the most important thing there was, if you want to persuade people, make them see things they see most directly. And one of them is, like he mentioned, climate change. And I think a lot of our participants here are from India. And to give them a big context, if you know, in India, in the northern part of India, especially in the hill areas over the past few days, there's been extensive rain. And it's very abnormal rain. It's been happening for the past few years. And the rains have been flooding those areas like crazy. And it's simply because the glaciers there have started melting. So because of the glaciers melting, there is an extensive orographic rainfall. And in addition to the rainfall, which already happens there, you already have more water flowing in. So you have floods every year. And this is a very big example of how you can use a very simple everyday thing, everyday natural calamity, or I mean, not everyday, or something you see in your surroundings, to actually persuade people to say, okay, there's something changing. And I think that's where your disruptive activity plays the best role. If there's something disruptive and you correlate that to something that's already happening and you say, okay, if we do this, this will improve something which has been going on. That's where people start thinking, okay, maybe this is going to work. And I think that's a very good point made there, Matthew. Thank you. Maybe let's take one or two more questions. We're still running out of time, and I apologize because we couldn't take a lot of the questions. But then again, I do love the questions coming in, and I appreciate, do keep them coming, but we'll try to take as many as we can. So maybe let's take another question now, this time maybe from Akshita. So Akshita, I think you're asking a question which has been discussed already, but I think we'd have a bit more focused discussion this time. So Akshita, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, thank you so much. I mean, like, I'm not very aware of topics like climate change. I wanted to participate in this MUN Impact conference because I actually wanted to know, like, how exactly, I mean, we teenagers as well, like, how can we start working on things like that? I mean, we talked about like working within our communities and everything, but like, I'm not very aware of this topic, so this question always keeps striking me. How can we do things exactly?
Okay, so how do we do things exactly? That's a very good question. And I think we've kind of touched base upon it, but let's try to take it into a more technological realm. So maybe we can start off with Piper. So I think we have already touched up upon this, but let's try to maybe talk about this in terms of AI. So if I give this a bit more focused idea, what do you think we can use AI for, and how can we use it exactly?
Wow, AI is a very broad topic because we can basically use AI for everything. But I guess it comes with trying to solve a problem. You know, let's say I plant a plant and the plant dies. I want to know why this plant died. Did I put too much water? Did I feed it too much food? This AI kind of solves this problem for me. It tracks what's happening so that I can make a better contribution to this world by planting a plant because my AI helped me save my own. And I think I'm actually going to link this to a project that the SEA, EA region were able to do. We actually pursued this project Plants project in 2020, and we actually presented it in the last Global Week of Action. And what we all did was that we all just grew a bunch of plants in our homes, and it was able to give us this escape from our urban lifestyle and kind of reconnect us with nature, which we hadn't been able to do, and we were all stuck inside because of the pandemic. And how we really used technology here was to disseminate this information. You know, it's really hard to think of ways to make technology do something for you, but you have to think about it in a way, you know, how can I use technology to leverage what I'm already doing? And the way we saw that was, you know, disseminating this information. We talked about it on the Global Week of Action. We taught everybody how to plant plants and how to take care of them and keep them growing and what certain plants needed. And another thing we're pursuing this year is actually sustained impact. And although that's like a bit unrelated to climate change itself, one way we're using technology is to remind each other to make sure to do it. You know, you compile this group of friends and you all tell each other every single day that you have to do one thing that will help climate per se. That is something that has been so useful to surround yourself, etc. But AI wise, I think it's too broad to specifically narrow down. You know, you could build robots, you could code, you could do anything you wanted. And it just really stems from having one really good idea and having the means to do so.
Yeah, totally. And I agree. I mean, simple things, plants dying off in an area, crops dying off due to climate change, due to, you know, activities you undertook. I think these are very, very small things which could be used. Agriculture is one very good area where this could be used. Particularly if there were ways to measure how soil toxicity has increased in an area, or stuff like that. Basic things, how life on land gets affected, and crops are a good example, particularly in agrarian countries. So good points made there. Thank you, Piper. Matthew, do you want to go next?
Definitely. I think let's start with maybe defining what we mean when we say AI, artificial intelligence. So what is AI? In my opinion, AI is basically a very powerful tool, or if not a pedagogy through which we can learn. It's a tool for learning. And what does that mean? Once again, it basically says that be it, you know, it doesn't necessarily, or the precepts, the principles and concepts of AI do not necessarily have to be applied in a technological realm. They can be applied just through pure logic as well. So I'm going to start off with giving a very simple, easy to do example for, you know, students here in today's room, and then I'll extend that idea and tell you guys about an example that would maybe require a bit more technological expertise to be able to execute. So first off, you know, the whole idea behind AI is we want to be able to learn. We want to be able to make data-driven conclusions. We want to be able to look at data. We want to be able to represent it through a graph, table, pie chart, whatever, and be able to make conclusions based on the trend of that data, or how that data is distributed. So one example would be, say, you wanted to look into the eating habits or the types of trash that is being disposed of at your school. And so how would you go about doing that? You would get a group of friends together, you'd go to your principal and say, hey, we want to do this research project for climate change on how students are, or what sort of waste and refuse students are producing. Your principal gives you the green light, you go to the cafeteria, the mess hall, whatever it is, and you get to work. You put on gloves, you start prying apart through the trash and everything, but it doesn't stop there. You can't just, you know, dig into bags full of trash or whatever's been poured away. That doesn't teach you anything. You don't learn anything from that. So instead, what you do is you have somebody else recording what they see. Oh, you know, how much of this is fresh produce that has been completely untouched? How much of this is half eaten? How much of this is non-biodegradable? how much of this will end up in landfills. So you have somebody or multiple people, making these observations and recording them down. And then you can represent all of this data in a very pretty format. You can use a spreadsheet, you can use a pie chart, you can use whatever tool that's available at your disposal, and you're able to see the data. You can see it grow, and from there you're able to make certain conclusions. So for example, say, man, like 60% of everything that's been thrown away is all non-biodegradable. It's all gonna end up in a landfill. You've got paper plates, you've got plastic utensils, you've got drink cups. All of this is gonna end up burned as a heaping, burning pile of garbage in a landfill somewhere. And that's terrible for the environment. All the styrofoam or all that plastic, all of it just seeping into the ground. That's gonna come back and hurt us like 100 years from now. And so from there, you're able to make recommendations, data-driven, data-based conclusions and recommendations to the people who are actually in charge, your school administrators, your principal, your board of directors, whatever it is. And you're able to tell them, say, hey, we did this research project. We found out that there's a huge glaring problem here. Why don't you work with us, listen to some of the ideas we have to offer, and say, how can we turn the cafeteria into a more green environment? How can we lessen our plastics consumption? And then thereby we can measure our success by seeing that 60% turn into a 40%, a 20%, and soon nothing. So that's one example, highly applicable. Well, if you have the motivation and passion to do it, it's highly applicable. You can go ahead and get your group of friends together and make this a reality. But how do you extend the principles of AI, which, as we've discussed, is the idea of data-driven conclusions, data learning? How can we take those principles and extend them in a more technologically advanced way? So I want to bring to your attention an event that I attended last year that is also going on right now. It's done by one of our amazing strategic partners based in India called Vruksh Ecosystem. They're basically a startup incubator, and they basically provide mentorship to startups that are working in the fields of sustainability. You can check out this link here. I think it only works for people based in India, but either way, if you're able to do it, please check out the event, maybe register. Sorry, you know me, I just have to do my shameless plug here. So please have a look at it, register. There are a lot of very interesting topics on sustainability, very inspiring creators, people who are using academic knowledge, people who are taking bachelors in biology, biochemistry, bioengineering, and applying that in actual startups and real life scenarios. So one scenario was a group of students from the National University of Singapore, NUS, whom I got to know last year. And they were basically using AI to culture bacteria, different strains of bacteria, with the hopes of finding a new strain that would be helpful in making agriculture more sustainable. And that's just amazing. That's the whole idea of AI, because you have this remarkable computing power, and it's able to cycle through a million different permutations. It's able to test, and once it tests and receives its results, it's able to analyze those results and make data-driven conclusions based on that. And that's so powerful. And you can see it, being applied in that scenario where these student researchers, like maybe 20, 22 years old, not much older than you or I, just highly dedicated, and with the right information and I suppose mentorship from a nice professor, have been able to create such an amazing initiative. And they're really pushing it forwards. And, like Jaydeep said, being able to apply those concepts of artificial intelligence.
There you have it. You have innovations ongoing, affecting everyday life. And that's the NUS example is really, really good. In fact, I live in Singapore. So all this kind of stuff, especially in countries which invest a lot of money on innovation, is coming up. Singapore is one such country. The US in some respects is another. Countries which generally do not have a lot of natural resource often end up applying a lot of money onto innovation. And that's where a lot of this kind of stuff comes in. Singapore doesn't make, any of you who know Singapore does not make a lot of its own food. It imports most of its food, but then there are innovations going on to try to improve the way we can get food. And I think by 2030, they want to produce 30% of their food locally. So innovation is critical, and not just in making humanity or human life better, but also in being able to produce more sustainable ways of living. And what Matthew just mentioned is a couple of examples of those. So before we wrap up, I'd like to go to Javier on his thoughts. So Javier, let's go.
Well, first of all, the thing with AI is that we don't need to be scared of it. Sometimes we hear the term AI and we think of complex algorithms, we think of these big machineries that do multiple tasks. And AI itself, while yes, it is all that, it can be other things, and it's way less than that. We can see it all around us. In our cell phones, we have AIs. In our computers, we have AIs. In the machines that we have in our schools, there's AIs. Also, those things help us compile a lot of information and helps us evaluate results further from where we are right now. In certain ways, we can say that they help us predict the future. These sort of ideas, it's really important because with this information, we can actually help it. We can actually grasp it and use it for more evaluating actions that we need to be taking right now. Because these sort of things help us understand what are the current problems and what are the root problems, because those are two key differences. We may see that the ozone levels are rising. At the same time, we can see that the toxicity in the waters is also being more diluted. We need to see all of these problems at the same time. And that's where the AIs come on. Because if we just look at these problems directly, we may only tackle them, but can lead to other problems in the long run. This has happened a lot in the recent years, where we've seen companies. We've been talking about how the contaminants in water, how the plastics are the ones that are most polluting. But we don't realize that there's a lot of other companies that produce other wasteful contaminants in the air, in the water. Why? Because we don't take into account all of this information regarding the AIs. And the bigger question is, okay, we know this information. How can you use it? How can we apply it? By creating certain programs and actions that are driven by information. Like Matthew previously said, this sort of statistics and information by itself, it's not worth anything because we only see numbers and we take them as numbers. But we need them to take them as possible solutions, to regard what are the biggest problems and what are the most damaging problems. And with this sort of information, get a bit of knowledge of what actions we can do. Sometimes, yes, like I mentioned, toxicity in water, it's not something that everyone can be actually helping. It's not like we can just drop some miracle powder in the water and just reduce the solution of toxicity in the water. There needs to be more done. But through these means, we can create awareness. We can try and reduce them so in the future, there's only the existing ones and we don't create more problems in these environments. In our schools, we can implement it by creating programs where we can actually try and analyze this information and help our communities by making these sort of ideas. Instead of just creating something based on nothing, create it based on information. Try and use these algorithms to analyze the problems, use them as a tool of understanding our surroundings, and use it as a means to actually creating solutions and not relying on them as if they're going to be the ones that are going to rule the world like in Terminator.
Yep, that's a very good point. Don't be afraid of AI. Robots are not going to take over the world. No one can actually take over the world because no one can outsmart human intelligence. Let me tell you that. AI has come because HI exists, and that is why HI will always be more superior. So do not be afraid of AI. And the second thing is using, if we kind of overcome that inhibition, that's when we'll be able to use it for disruptive technologies. And that is why it's important. What Javier mentioned is actually very, very important. It's very important to make sure that AI is not taken as a taboo. It's not taken as something to be scared of. Robots will not take over the world, to be very simple and concise. So we are already at 12:05. In fact, I overshot by 5 minutes. So let's kind of wrap it up now and go over some concluding comments from each of our panelists. Let's start off with Matthew, maybe.
Didn't realize I have to go again so soon.
I suppose I kind of want to go back to what I said at the very beginning, because in a way it's very deep and personal to me. Because we're so thankful to live in societies where the overall human conception of climate and how we're supposed to take advantage of the resources around us, it's advanced so much more than our primitive concept in, say, like the 1800s, right during the Industrial Revolution. Thankfully, since then, we've realized that, what we're doing is hurting the planet, that all those, I remember, I think it's Stalin who said, or Mao Zedong, he said, like, when you have all those chimneys and they're of the steel mills and they're producing all those fumes, it's a sign of progress. Fortunately, we now live in an era where we know that that isn't progress, but rather that is an alarming sight to see. And so even though we've made all these advancements in terms of our ability to comprehend and voice climate issues, there are people who say, man, nothing has happened. It's been 20 years. You have Greta Thunberg going on annually on a stage to yell at politicians, but nothing's changed in the past 20 years. Why is that? And I think the answer, once again, going back to what I said at the beginning, is because there are, I don't want to get too Illuminati here, but there are shadowy forces that seek to actively profit from their greed and from their willful and destruction of the environment. And they're perfectly aware of this. They routinely stick their hands in political systems all over the world and do a little flim flam and magic tricks to activate their self-preservation, to be able to stay alive and continue to reap profits. And it really starts by being aware that such forces exist, and realizing that, hey, let's not go after this person just because they might have drunk from a plastic bottle, or at least, while we recognize that there are hypocrites out there, there's the biggest hypocrite of all. And they sit high upon our government institutions, and they are, oppressing people in lesser developed countries by taking advantage of their natural resources, and not returning whatever benefit they receive at fair value to their workers and the communities they benefit from. So it's really important to just be aware of this, and not just to be aware, but to start talking about it, because what they fear is that people start talking about it, people start realizing, then people start going after the politicians in their pocket, or lobbying against the creation of new pipelines or new drilling sites. So that is really where it starts. Grassroots organizing, being aware, and in a way using social media not just to spread information, but to organize. Now's the time to organize and actually act. And hopefully through that, we're able to really affect some change and bring us closer towards achieving the 2030 agenda.
Great, thank you. Some lovely comments there. Thanks, Matthew. Let's go on to Javier now.
Well, for myself, if I want you guys to take something, or at least one thing from this whole session, is don't be afraid of the negative sides of helping. Because again, like we mentioned throughout this whole session, we cannot make perfect changes. We're not going to get an absolute solution to all of these climate changes or these environmental problems. There's going to be some bad things, and these are good, but we need to take them into consideration. An example when I was researching for this whole thing was how this environmental can shift, and how these problems, we only tackle certain things but ignore the repercussions. The example that I'm going to give you is from the plastic bags. At least here in Mexico and many other countries, they have been banned. Why? Because they have been related to deaths of many animals and pollution. The solution was creating plastic or fabric bags. The thing with this is that studies have been proven that creating one of these bags from, let's just say, paper, it's 10 times more harmful, the production, than creating one plastic bag. But the thing is, we only see the face value of saying it's not being a plastic bag thrown into the streets. These sort of things is the things that we need to be thinking ourselves. We need to be actually being aware of what the solutions can bring. problems and solution and well, good things. Because not everything is as black and white in this reality. There are many companies that do certain actions and we don't know why. We only see them as face value, seeing they're bad companies because they're contaminating the water. Other companies actually try and make certain things because the impact is lower. Because if they change into newer technologies, they may bring other harmful problems to the environment. And this is not bad. Companies and ourselves actually do harm. The carbon footprint that we all produce is never going to be zero. All of these things, we need to actually take them into account. We don't need to just hide these problems by saying, I'm helping. I don't use the car. I don't turn on the lights at certain hours of the day. I don't create these sort of products because you're creating other problems. And this is also a good thing because it means that you're being aware of what are you doing and you can try and improve it. You can try and make the best out of it and create awareness. So, in conclusion, we're going to make harm either way, but we need to be aware of this and we need to make the best out of it. Instead of just ignoring it, let's just take it and make the best things out of it.
Thanks, Javier. Piper, do you want to conclude?
Yeah, I'll keep this as concise as possible because we're running a bit over time. But in short, really, we as a generation are more aware than any other um, of how this is affecting our lives, really. Everybody prior to us has just kind of ignored it or tried to address it and then continued to ignore it. But we're at this point where we can't continue to ignore it anymore. It's gotten so bad that, you know, we've heard news about it, the world might end because of this. And obviously, you know, these claims are not substantiated, but it begs you to consider really that we should be doing something. And so we've showed you a few ideas of what we've done, what others have done, and some ideas you could pursue on your own. Matthew actually put a link in the chat, which you should definitely consider if you have the opportunity to do so. But the point is, if there's anything you should take away, it's that you can do action, no matter how small you think it is. And if you can, you should feel obligated to, because this is the world we live in. And just one change could really go a long way.
With that, thank you to our panelists and to our participants for taking part in this open forum. It was great to hear your ideas. It was great to hear those questions, some wonderful questions there. My apologies to those whose questions I could not take in the interest of time, but certainly I wish to thank all of you for joining in. And just my few cents to end this would be that everything which has been said today is something we've recurringly heard in a lot of different places. But it's important that we understand that these are some issues which require urgent consideration from all of us as the youth community. In fact, I can tell you this, that now the world, adults, everyone is looking towards this as a serious issue. And if you follow science and if you follow general knowledge a lot, you will know that the Nobel Prize in Physics this year went to global warming predictions. And it went to the mathematical modeling of global warming predictions. And the idea, the fact that people, the scientific community is now taking this into so much serious consideration is evidence of the fact that we as the upcoming generation need to keep that fire going. Because if we want to make sure that at least, at the very least, that IPCC's predictions don't come true, the world doesn't end, or we in the next few decades, we are not at alert zero, we do not want to stay there anymore. At the very least, we want to come out of it. And that the only thing our generation can do to avert that is to make sure that we don't leave such a bad situation for our coming generation. And that is through advocacy, that is through action, that is through community involvement and all other elements, including technology, which we've discussed today. So thank you everyone for joining in. And I look forward to seeing you all for tomorrow's GWOA session as well. I think we will be concluding tomorrow, but it will be lovely to see you all there. I'll hand over the floor to Naduni now. Naduni, floor is yours.
Thank you, Jaddeep. So first of all, thank you all for coming and thank you all for joining us. And thank you for those wonderful questions and comments as well. Next, thank you all the panelists for that wonderful discussion. In my opinion, You gave us a lot of information about a topic that we don't usually pay much attention to. And also you built a really good connection between the two topics, SDG 15 and technology. So at last but not least, I would like to give a huge thank you for Jadeep Singh, who is our moderator. And yeah, with that, this remarks the end of the final forum for the GWOA for October. And with the hope of meeting you all in the future sessions, have a nice day.
Yes, all right. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you, Matt, Javier, and Pivar for excellent presentation and also taking questions from all of our participants and answering them very precisely. Thank you, everybody. And I would just like to remind everyone of you that today we also have another session, and that is our sandbox session 2, which will be starting in less than 1 hour at 17 UTC. So try your best to join if you signed up. And also tomorrow, our GWOA October round is going to conclude. So at 15 UTC, we will be having our closing ceremony and dolphin pool session together. Join there as well. And the link will be sent out to you around 22 to 21 hours before the session. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Taskinul, do you need us to debrief or anything?
No problem. You might leave now.
Okay.
And we will be closing the room soon. Probably Jaideep will be closing the room.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
We are also very proud of you, everyone.
Nice with you. Good session. Good session, folks.
Same as well. Thank you guys. Have a good
Thank you,
one.
guys. Have a good
Stay safe. Have a good day.